The security footage would later show exactly 11:13 a.m. when the golden elevators of Trump Tower opened with a mechanical whisper that seemed to echo through the marble atrium like a death knell. Karoline Leavitt stepped out, her Louboutin heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that would haunt Donald Trump's memory for months to come. But what the cameras couldn't capture was the electricity in the air, the way her phone buzzed incessantly with urgent messages from CNN, Fox News, and the Washington Post. The way her hands trembled not from fear, but from barely contained fury, because just 3 hours earlier she had discovered something that would change everything. Nobody expected what would happen next in that 27th floor suite. Not the Secret Service agents positioned discreetly in the hallway, not the advisors waiting anxiously in the adjacent conference room, and certainly not the former president himself, who had summoned her believing this would be just another political negotiation. They were all wrong. Her invitation hadn't been a request, it had been a command delivered through back channels, the kind of political strong-arming that had defined Washington for decades. But Karoline Leavitt wasn't just any politician stepping into Trump Tower that morning. Before we dive deeper into this explosive confrontation, subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden power struggles behind America's most controversial political moments. Because what you're about to witness wasn't just a meeting, it was the moment a new generation declared war on the old guard. The private suite on the 27th floor materialized before her like a scene from a different era. Karoline Leavitt hadn't arrived at this moment by accident. At 29, she carried herself with the precision of someone who had learned to navigate political minefields while most of her peers were still figuring out their college majors. Her background was a study in contradictions, a working-class kid from New Hampshire who had somehow managed to decode the language of power, a Trump loyalist who had gradually evolved into something far more dangerous, an independent thinker. She had cut her teeth in Trump's press operation, absorbing every lesson about media manipulation, message control, and the brutal arithmetic of political survival. But somewhere between the campaign rallies and the crisis management meetings, she had developed something her mentor never expected, a conscience that couldn't be bought or bullied into submission. The Clean Politics Act wasn't just legislation to her, it was a declaration of independence from a system that treated public service like a family business. Donald J. Trump stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette framed against the gray Manhattan skyline like a king surveying his domain. Even in his post-presidency, he commanded the kind of gravitational pull that bent careers and broke spirits. The suite around him, all red velvet chairs, golden frames, and crystal decanters, served as a monument to a very particular vision of American success. But today, something was different in his posture. The way he held his shoulders suggested a man who had been receiving troubling reports from his network of informants and advisors. Because Karoline Leavitt wasn't just challenging a bill or questioning a strategy anymore. She was challenging the fundamental assumption that had governed his political universe, that loyalty flowed upward and power dictated truth. When she entered, he didn't turn immediately. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, heavy with unspoken accusations and barely contained fury. "You went too far," he said without turning, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of disappointment and threat that had cowed senators and CEOs alike. "This bill of yours, the Clean Politics Act? It's dividing my base." The words hit her like a slap, but Karoline had been preparing for this moment for months. She didn't flinch. "It's not your base anymore, Mr. President. It belongs to the people." He turned slowly, and she could see something dangerous flickering in his eyes, the look of a man who had just been told that his empire might not be as permanent as he had believed. "Watch your tone," he said, stepping closer. "I made you, Karoline. I plucked you from obscurity and gave you a platform. Without me, you'd still be answering phones in some dingy campaign office in Manchester." The insult was calculated, designed to remind her of her place in the hierarchy, to reduce her to the grateful subordinate she had once been. But something had changed in Karoline during those long nights crafting the Clean Politics Act. Something that made Trump's attempt at dominance feel hollow and desperate. She took a step closer, closing the distance between them, until she could see her reflection in his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "You inspired me, but I built my own voice. And it speaks for a generation that's tired of loyalty being a transaction, tired of democracy being auctioned off to the highest bidder." The room seemed to contract around them, as if the very air was holding its breath. Trump moved to the glass table and picked up a thick dossier, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. "This?" He held up the folder like evidence in a trial. "You leaked internal communications from the RNC. You embarrassed allies who trusted you, who opened doors for you. You violated every unwritten rule of political survival." But Karoline was ready. She had been preparing for this accusation for weeks, knowing that her actions would eventually reach Trump's ears through the labyrinthine network of Republican operatives and donors who treated political information like currency. "I expose corruption," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. They were using campaign funds to bury investigations into voting machine irregularities, not to prove fraud, but to hide the fact that the machines were actually working perfectly. They wanted to keep the base angry and suspicious, because angry people donate more money. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out her own folder, placing it on the table between them. "These are the financial records, Mr. President. Detailed breakdowns showing how your Stop the Steal fundraising was being used to pay for opposition research against Republicans who dared to certify election results. It was never about election integrity. It was about maintaining control." Trump's expression shifted subtly, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked genuinely surprised. Not because he was unaware of the financial arrangements Karoline suspected, he knew far more than he was admitting, but because she had managed to obtain documentation that was supposed to be locked away in the vaults of party headquarters. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice lower now, more dangerous. Karoline smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "The same place you taught me to look for leverage, Mr. President, in the spaces between what people say and what they actually do." The silence that followed was different from the tension that had opened their meeting. This was the quiet of a chess match, where both players suddenly realized the board had been flipped upside down. Trump walked to the window, and Karoline could see him processing the implications of what she had just revealed. If she had these documents, what else did she have? How deep did her network of sources go? And most importantly, what did she plan to do with this information? "You know what they'll say if you keep this up?" he said finally, not turning around. "That you turned on your own party. That you're just another ambitious politician willing to burn everything down for personal gain." Karoline approached the window and stood beside him, both of them looking out at the city that had shaped them in different ways in different eras. "I didn't turn," she said. "I evolved. And maybe that's what the party needs, evolution instead of endless repetition of the same playbook." She placed another document on the windowsill, a petition with 1.2 million signatures supporting the Clean Politics Act, but also something more. Preliminary polling data showing that her positions were resonating with younger Republicans, independents, and even some Democrats who were tired of tribal warfare. "The machinery isn't just rusting, Mr. President," she said. "It's being replaced by something entirely new." Trump picked up the polling data, and she watched his expression change as he processed the numbers. This wasn't just rebellion, it was a potential realignment of American politics, with Karoline Leavitt as the catalyst. "What happens when the media turns on you?" Trump asked, but the question lacked its earlier force. "When the donors pull out and the party machinery aligns against you?" Karoline turned to face him fully, and in that moment, both of them understood that something fundamental had shifted. "Then I'll do what Americans do best," she said. "I'll fight. But I won't fight alone, and I won't fight for a system that's already broken. I'll fight to build something better." She gathered her documents and headed toward the door, but paused before leaving. "You taught me that politics is about power, Mr. President. But you never taught me that power could be something other than control over other people. Maybe it can be the ability to inspire them to expect more from their leaders." The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suite like a gavel falling. Trump remained at the window for a long time after she left, watching the traffic flow through Manhattan streets like blood through arteries. When his advisors finally entered, they found him still staring down at the city, his expression unreadable. "She's going to be a problem," one of them whispered. Trump didn't reply immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something that might have been admiration, or might have been fear. "She already is." That night, as news of the meeting began to leak through the interconnected networks of political operatives and journalists, the story that emerged wasn't quite what either participant had expected. The headlines didn't focus on party unity or political strategy. Instead, they captured something more fundamental. "The torch passes to a new generation," read the Washington Post. "Trump's protégé becomes his challenger," declared CNN. Fox News, tellingly, remained silent. But the real impact wasn't in the immediate media coverage. It was in the phone calls that started coming into Karoline's office from young Republicans who had been quietly questioning the party's direction, from moderate Democrats who saw an opportunity for bipartisan cooperation, from activists and organizers who suddenly believed that change might be possible after all. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a voice anymore. She had become something far more dangerous to the established order. She had become hope. Hope that politics could be more than a zero-sum game between competing tribes. Hope that leadership could inspire rather than merely dominate. Hope that democracy could evolve without destroying itself in the process. But as she sat in her apartment that night, reviewing the messages and planning her next moves, she understood that she had also become something else. A target. Because in a political system built on the assumption that power was finite and must be hoarded rather than shared, her vision of collaborative leadership represented an existential threat to everyone who had built their careers on division and conflict. The question that would define the coming months wasn't whether she was ready to lead, it was whether the country was ready to follow someone who refused to treat politics as warfare by other means. And in Trump Tower, as the former president finally retired to his private quarters, he found himself asking a different question entirely. Had he created a monster, or had he finally encountered someone who might be worthy of the power he had wielded? The answer, like so many things in politics, would depend entirely on what happened next. The clash between Trump and Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a meeting, it was a preview of America's political future. When established power meets determined disruption, only one can emerge unchanged. As we watch this generational shift unfold, the question isn't whether change is coming, but whether we're ready to embrace it or fight it. Don't miss the next chapter of this political drama. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay ahead of the story that's reshaping American politics. Tell me in the comments, do you think Karoline's approach represents genuine reform, or is this just another ambitious politician using anti-establishment rhetoric to gain power? And more importantly, would you vote for disruption over stability?